the competition was weird, oddly to say, it was not as crazy as we expected.
Pretty
I'm
cool.
really hyped for 10.2.6. I know we can't talk about that yet, but
You know, maybe as the season winds down towards the end, you find a point where you're gonna stop playing. But we did that before as well.
I know the Race World First gets literally millions of viewers and hundreds of thousands concurrently at all times. I think that would make the race twice as popular. Dude, that was one of the best Patreon questions ever. That was sick.
All right, episode 15 is the number of this episode, recalled by me immediately at the start during the intro. And this week we've got, actually, there's a pretty jam-packed This Week in WoW full of stuff that will be being announced this week. We've got Dragonflight Season 4 dungeon changes ahead. We've got a development update, and we've got more hero talents coming. But all of that is in the future, so we'll have to talk about whatever's in all of those things in next episode. The big thing that happened this week, I guess, was MDI concluded, which we've done a lot of episodes about MDI, so if you want to hear us go really deep on it, like 2 of our last 4 episodes, you can hear that. But this week, I think we'll not spend too long on it. Is worth mentioning, though, Echo... Okay, spoilers. Echo lost MDI for the first time since I've been casting World of Warcraft. The last time before this was Sydney in 2019 or something, which was wild. Unbelievably dominant run, but I mean, hats off to Mandatory for dethroning them. It was really cool. Max, for you watching on the co-stream, like how hype was that at the end of the tournament to see Echo lose? Obviously, somebody watching Echo lose has special value for you, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, it was like surreal. Like I was watching it, and like even watching Mandatory get out of the damage amp, or about to go into the damage amp phase on Dantalian Axe, I was like, wow, this might be happening. I'm like, wait, how long is this phase? Like, imagine, like, is there still a way Mandatory could lose this? Like, I didn't believe it until it actually happened, because I think most viewers would probably relate that, I don't know, they just seem like a step ahead of every team when they do this kind of stuff. And also, it was super surprising to see Mandatory just randomly be Mandatory again after like a year hiatus of not looking like the same team until this weekend. So that was really cool. But yeah, seeing Echo lose is awesome. Love that. And I'm glad they didn't get on a personal level, I'm glad they didn't get the season sweep of all of the esporty type things in WoW. So yeah, that felt good. Also, but even then, and this, like, all props to Mandatory. Mandatory is great. I still felt like I was the most impressed by Echo over the weekend. Like, specifically, the strat that Mandatory beat Echo with was Echo strat. Echo, as far as we know, did the Rise thing, right? Like, all the cool, crazy, wild things. Like, they just had better routes than everyone in, like, every dungeon. I don't feel like they got out-stratted in this tournament at all. Like, as someone... But yeah, you have to think, I'm biased, right? Like, I'm a strat guy. I'm, like... I don't know if you guys have seen Dune 2 yet, but, like, when I see someone snap across the map 3 times in Rise and snap trash onto boss from like 200 to 2,000 yards away, I'm like, Lisan al-Gaib, you know? I'm like, that's the man. As is written, what an insane strat. That's all I care about. So, like, on the strategy side, I still feel like Echo is just miles ahead of the next team. But seeing Mandatory compete with them on that level was really sick. They seemed so happy when they won, so that was really cool. I mean, I know the feeling of fighting against those people for years and then winning for the first time. I'll never forget that. So, yeah, it's super hype, and I hope I hope this momentum carries them into being a more competitive TGP team in the future. And just, I hope to see them play like that in all of the upcoming dungeon stuff. I think that was super cool. I don't know if they will. I don't know if they said they're, because I could totally respect, because, like, there's a lot of downsides to the MDI. I could totally respect being like, wow, we finally beat Echo, and just, like, hang up your boots. Like, that would go so hard. So I don't know what they're going to do, but it was really impressive.
And then, of course, our resident cat is returning to us this week, which, off of a medium successful MDI performance. I don't know, Dorki, how did you feel about how MDI went for you guys? You, obviously, I mean, if you don't win, there's going to be some sadness, but overall, how do you feel about how you played and how the team did?
Yep, yo, I'm back. I hate myself, but hello. Been a absolutely awful month. So yeah, I mean, honestly, we performed better than I expected, because we kind of had like a really rough practice 2 weeks or so. We didn't get to do as much as we wanted. There's been some downsides where like some of us were on the verge of giving up and just fuck it, YOLO, whatever, just send it. But I mean, like coming in fourth is like still like decent for us, all things considered. And
It was a stack
uh,
tournament.
right. Well, not only was it a stack tournament, but we were also just like underperforming. I'm still like happy with our results though. I
Okay.
would say though, like the competition was weird, oddly to say, it was not as crazy as we expected. I felt like most of the teams underperformed as well. Like yeah, like Echo definitely had the best strategies and they were definitely looking like the strongest team, but because of how MDI works, they were not the Echo we were used to seeing. Like their consistency was much lower. They were looking super vulnerable, they were making a lot of mistakes, and it was kind of surprising to us. Mandatory, on the other hand, was like quite the opposite. Those guys,
They're nasty.
yeah, they were the most consistent team of the tournament. But like, what made it feel really weird for us, at least as competitors, it felt like we could have won the tournament too. Like, it felt like we could have beat any of these teams. We're just like looking at their times and we're like, man, this is like not that crazy. Because leading up to the tournament during practice, we're like, ah, we're so screwed, man. Our times are probably garbage, and like, we're expecting these teams to pull out some crazy stuff and like super cool tech, and they're all gonna be like a minute faster or whatever. But it actually turned out like not really. Like honestly, if we had performed better, I mean, obviously, like anyone could have said the same, but had we done what we were putting up in practice, we could have actually won. And a lot of MDI is about like beating yourself, which like we saw a lot
Hmm.
on Twitter. Like Echo was kind of like well, now specifically we were saying like making tweets saying like I choked and like they basically beat themselves. But like that's pretty much MDI. MDI in a nutshell is not necessarily about the strategies and like how much cook you have. It's more about how consistent you play. And yeah, on paper, Echo probably should have won, but the same could have been said in this first season of Dragonflight. I was actually talking with a bunch of the Echo boys. I had a talk with Maris earlier, and they actually felt like it was the complete opposite situation of season one Dragonflight. Because in season one Dragonflight, Mandatory actually had the better strategies and the better times, and on paper, Mandatory was the better team, but they couldn't pull it off, and Echo just took advantage of that and won. But like this time was the
Hmm.
complete opposite. Echo had the better strategy. Echo had the best times. We all shared our times at the end, and we were the best, but they just couldn't pull it off. And I think this season was just kind of crazy. Like these dungeons were so much harder than before. Maybe it's just because of like how good all the teams have gotten. Like we saw so many matches where teams were almost neck and neck, even between the first seed and like say seventh and eighth seed, which is like rarely the case. But teams have just gotten so good to the point where you have to play perfect to actually win these matches. And there's just so much room for error, which is like why we saw Echo not performing as well as they normally do. But yeah, I mean, definitely sucks for us. But it was also kind of good to see that it wasn't just us struggling, and that like we could have definitely won it if we managed to pull off what we were doing in practice.
I know that feeling too, because like because in practice there's no pressure. Like if you mess up, you can just restart the key. Like something I noticed when doing MDI is, and I'm not ashamed to say this, like when you're about to play, you get like crazy butterflies in your stomach. You're like
Oh,
super, like
100%.
at
Yep.
least right away, at least for me. And it's not that way. I've never done the TGP, but I imagine it wouldn't feel that way as a player in the TGP because it's like, okay, you wipe and mess up a key, you have like how good you do in the day is like how well you do over the course of 5 hours. Everyone is going to make small mistakes, but like in an MDI setting, like one small mistake could actually be the difference between winning and losing or being out of the tournament entirely. So I feel like the stakes of it, there's a huge value in being someone who's been there before and having experience and knowing how to manage those emotions because it absolutely affects you, affects everyone as a player. And that's something where Echo just being there before I think they just have that gap. Like they show up to a thing knowing they're better than the other team, knowing something can go wrong and that they can just fix it. But I feel like most other teams who don't have that confidence, you show up and you're super nervous, and then someone makes a mistake, and then maybe you have like a Dobby on your team, and then now someone's tilted, and then like it's just downward spiral, right? But I want to kind of talk to you more about this is what I've heard from every MDI player. Like you watch the MDI, even Ben. Ben was in my chat this weekend. And he was like, "Man, you know what? Like this looks fun. It makes me want to do the MDI again." And then like you start practicing, and then you do the MDI, and win or lose, you're like, "I never want to see these people ever again." Like it's
That
just
is
too
so true. That is 100% true, by the way.
yeah, it's too much time together with the same people, doing the same thing. So like, how do you feel about it? Like, if there's an MDI in a month, would you be doing it or not?
If I were to say right now, absolutely not. But you know, things change. Like it happens with every single team, by the way. Like, well, maybe not every single team. Like maybe not Echo, because you know we've been playing together for so long. But like for most teams, they go through this period where they go through MDI prison and they're just stuck playing with the same players for like 14 hours a day for an entire month. And mistakes happen, conflicting opinions happen where like people like just argue about like, oh, like we should be doing this instead of this. And there are just so many moments in that month of MDI prison where players might not get along with each other, which you know I've had with like almost every single team I've been in so far, and I'm sure it's the same for most other players or most other teams. But there's just something about MDI, like when you're actually playing in the MDI itself, it's like so much better than all the practice you've been through. When you're like actually playing, the highs are there, like you get the jitters, it's like super exciting. And when you actually win, the pop off moments are so great. Like
Oh
that's why I
yeah,
kind of wish we could see the player POVs. Like man, if people were streaming it, it'd be so fucking hype.
yeah.
Like I
Be
swear to
like
God, people were popping off so hard.
that moment when you complete a great run in tournament, and then you look down at your chat, and you're just waiting for the admin to tell you
Yep.
that you've won. Like that feeling, that experience is I don't know if it makes it all worth it, but it is what the really cool thing is part of it. Like I've always felt that cups are just super fun, and if they could somehow get that experience, I don't know if we want to do a whole episode on the MDI, right? But I just think it was really good this season, and I think that this MDI kind of changed my mind. Like in the past, I've kind of just thought TGP that format is better, and I still really enjoy watching the TGP, but the MDI has been such a struggle because some of the matches just you're just kind of sitting around and you're not watching. This global finals was the first one where literally every single series I thought the any team could win. It wasn't 50-50, but it wasn't 90-10 either. It was like 70-30. Like maybe at the most the whole tournament outside of maybe two matches in the first round. But then the lower bracket, the elimination games, right? They built the Saturday this season to kind of be a lot more suspenseful. You're moving on or you're getting disqualified the whole day. Those matches in the lower bracket were a bloodbath, man. It was not like two teams and it's like, oh, well, who cares if the ball bandits and whoever goes through here, they're just going to lose to Perplex. That's not true. Like both of those teams could beat Perplex, right? And Perplex is awesome. So
In fact,
I don't,
Echo was in the lower finals bracket.
yeah, Echo was in the lower finals, right? Like, I mean, Mandatory didn't lose a map, or they didn't lose a series, right? So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I used to be like delete the MDI, only do TGP. I don't know if I'm at that point. I think there's room for both if that many good teams actually compete, and there has
So I
never been
will
that many good
say,
teams before.
I think after this MDI vote, there will probably be a lot less people interested in the MDI or competing in the MDI, which will probably change that
Really?
opinion.
So
Yeah, because
so
I've
why
been
do you
talking with a
think
lot of
that?
teams. I just feel like so many teams are just like so fed up with the MDI. I've spoken with like people from Eclipse. I was playing with Yips yesterday. Like you know, people from Legendary, you know, like all these teams, and the common opinion amongst most teams were like this has been awful. It's been such a rough MDI, such a rough uh tournament for competitors. And I mean, I think like the only teams that really feel positive about it is like Mandatory and Echo because you know like obviously, well, partially because they performed so well, but also for a lot of the other teams, it's been the practice has been terrible, and the tournament itself has been really rough.
So all of the players prefer TGP then. That's what you're saying.
I would say so. Yeah, most players would prefer the TGP. So
I'm
yeah,
just
like
thinking,
I don't know if we'd have as much competition in the future MDIs. Like maybe it's just one of those things where they just say we don't want to do MDI.
So you're
and
saying
like,
it was
MDI
just
comes around, we're just
random
gonna do it
that
anyways.
so many good teams happen to want to play the MDI at the same time, and you think that that's not realistic in the future?
I think a large part of it is coming off of the TGP because, like, a lot of these teams that we saw were teams that came from the TGP, and like Eclipse, for example, they had great success in TGP and they wanted to play again as a team. And obviously, there's been a break from the MDI since we had TGP last season. So I'm sure a lot of teams were feeling like, oh, let's compete in TGP because like what else is there to do this season? But yeah, I don't know if we'll see the same level of competition. Like maybe it'll just be Mandatory and Echo and like Perplex and like maybe one or two other teams, but I honestly don't see us having the
Yeah.
same
I also think that
amount of
this is
high-level
the
teams
wrong
competing.
time to give predictions about that because I bet after previous MDIs, all the competitors are like, "There's no fucking way I'm doing this again," and then they do it again.
Yeah,
So like
exactly. It could be one of those situations.
where it's just been enough time. Who knows? Okay, so players want the TGP. I think the viewers in general prefer the TGP, but this was one hell of an MDI. Probably. Well, I don't know if it was it was the most competitive. This is the most fun I've had watching the MDI, for sure. And also shout out Echo. They lost, but I mean that their run of dominance was like probably something that will never happen to anyone again. Like that was like so insanely
I
hard to
mean,
replicate.
even as a losing team, they lost in such a great way. Like they were. It's not like they got.
Hmm.
It's not like they got swept. Like they made a lot of mistakes, but then they like came back so strong, and it's like, wait, can they actually come back from this? Like in the Rise when they were having all those deaths, we were immediately thinking, oh, GG, but
That's really
they were pretty
interesting.
neck and neck with
So
Mandatory.
I've thought about this a lot. We've done a lot of winning, we've done a lot of losing. And the times that I felt the worst about losing are when I feel like we threw the race. Like when I feel like we were the cause of our loss. I mean, even in this race, like I feel like Echo just played better than us on Fire Rack and they won. It was really close. We both played really well the whole raid, whatever. But like I didn't feel like we beat ourselves on Fire Rack at all. So it was a little bit easier to live with. The
But
things
that's
that
kind
are
of the
the
nature of PvE, right? Like just
well, this is
you can only
PvE.
really beat yourself. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like
Well, not
you
really.
only
Like
really have
sometimes you can make decisions that are a calculated risk and fail, and that is the biggest reason why you lose. And those, I get so much more beat up about feeling like we just lost steam or we made a bad decision and we lost than ever losing and being like someone else played better than you. Like that's the difference between
That's
that
true. That's
shit
true.
sitting in your head for weeks. Like I don't know
Yeah.
about Echo players specifically, but like I feel like they think they threw. I feel
Oh,
like
absolutely. Yep.
so
100%
so
even
you're
so.
saying like that's the best way to lose? Maybe from an outside perspective, but
From an outside, yeah.
I bet they are super super beat up about that if they're anything like me. At least having gone through
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah, they are for sure.
One characteristic of almost everybody I know in Echo is that they really hate losing. Like it is such a like compared to the average person who doesn't like losing. Echo hate the Echo players, and especially like man Gingy, like some of the people on
Yeah.
that team.
Gingy,
That is like
I mean,
like,
all of them really. Yeah.
no, I think Gingy's on a totally different level than all of them. But yeah, it may be their whole team, but he specifically he hates losing more than anyone in the world.
yeah, and obviously like that's sometimes leads to negative things, but to their credit I think they were very graceful in their loss this time around. But I don't know, like that I would be terrified of playing against Echo in the next one because I feel like they are going to be pissed off, right? Like they're going to be they're not going to want to let that happen again.
I thought about this
Yeah,
a
so-
lot. Go ahead, Dorky.
It's funny you say that, Dratnos, because we had this talk earlier amongst like the Valve competitors, and this was the first time where all the teams were so pressured by the level of competition. Every single team upped their hours from like the usual 10 to 12 to 14 plus, and it's been
Jesus.
insane for these teams. Yeah, like we haven't been able like I now had a whole talk about it on his stream and like all these other teams. They've been talking about like dialing it back or maybe even like retiring, and that's because of how much they saw each other practicing. Like especially for players on the EU realm, like which is pretty much all of them, right? They're all just in the EU realm and they just see each other on at all times, and that puts so much pressure on them. It's sort of like the race to world first splits situation. Like when you see one of the guilds having 10 or 12 buckets, whatever, you suddenly feel like, what am I doing with only like 6 or 8, right? Like you gotta like up your numbers.
Before you go any farther, I can give you an exact anecdote. So we had 9
Yep.
characters, and then when they announced the bigger eye level jump, it was obvious to us that splits would be harder. So we actually upped our characters to 12. We were just like, fuck it, let's do it. It's super easy to
Yeah,
it's the
fuck it.
easiest to gear a character ever. And Echo had a meeting later that day after learning about that, and they made 12 characters just because we did. That's literally how that happened. Like yeah,
Yeah, the
just
exact
in
same thing is
context.
happening in the MDI where they're normally practicing for 10 to 12 hours, and then one of the teams, like, Echo saw mandatory doing 14 plus hours. Like, when they were ending, they were still on. It's funny too, because mandatory was doing this during Echo's cup, because they had different cups, right? Like, mandatory was in B and Echo was in A. During the A Cup, mandatory was putting in more hours than Echo, and that put so much pressure on all the teams.
It showed.
All the EU teams I've talked with, they're doing 14 plus hours except for Yips's team, Bald Bandits. They were doing like 8 to 10 hours or whatever. And I think that put so much mental strain on most of the players.
So
You
we
know
think
what?
like
Now in particular,
unsustainable, like
yeah,
no
it's
way
just
to.
unsustainable,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Maybe.
For like a
Oh, that's
month on
so
end. And
interesting. So I spoke to my friend Eugene Pobelter. He's a LCS player. He played for
yeah,
like a long time, and I was like asking him how his LCS practice schedule and things was, because we're big into like the as much of the sports science as you can put into it, of like how much you should be practicing, how much you should be playing, like how much sleep do you need, stuff like that. Even though what we do is a bit different than a lot of those esports. And he's like, you know what? I used to think that like time away from the game and rest and all this stuff was important, but then like you just look at the LCK and the LPL, and they're just playing League 16 hours a day all year round. Like there's no worry about like time away or like mental health or anything. It's just like you just play all day, and that's just the best thing. And it is unsustainable, and it does burn you out, but it is in a short-term game it's the best thing you can do. Uh, so yeah, like you said, very unsustainable. And if mandatory was really putting in those hours, though, it definitely showed. I mean, I don't know what happened to that team. They just absolutely did not look like the same team in their cup, in the TGP. Everything since the last MDI, they have looked like a different team, right? Am I crazy in saying that? Like they haven't had that same power. And then this weekend, it was as if none of that happened, and they were just as good as they were in season 1. And I wonder, have they spoken about that? Like, does anyone else think that's? I think it's so weird. Like, how can you be as good as Echo in a tournament? And like, just like even Echo's own admission, like they were awesome in season 1. Like they had the better routes. You had better routes than Echo. Like that doesn't happen. Like, how do you go from that to almost seeming like a tier below team for 8 months, and then you just snap right back in? It had to be practice time or passion level or something, like some so it's so strange.
well, I think with the strategy thing, I don't think that's necessarily true because, like, as we've said earlier, right? Like in season one, mandatory actually had the better strategies than
That's what I'm
Echo.
saying.
I think it was more about like the execution and just being able to maintain the consistency. And this time around, they managed to maintain that consistency. Like I don't know what exactly clicked with them, but
Yo, I'm
one
not
thing
confused
that
about that. I'm confused about what happened in between.
oh, I see.
Did
Yeah,
they lower their
one thing
practice
that
time? Did they not care as much? Like,
no, I think they've always been like a go hard kind of team. Like from what I've heard and known, they are the team that like puts in the most amount of hours. But
yeah.
I was actually talking with Maystein earlier, and Maystein said that normally it takes them like up to 2 days before the matches where they like start to learn all the dungeons and like fully complete runs and like start going through every single one of them. But this time around, they got to that phase like a week ahead.
Oh,
It was just
interesting.
like they got the maps and they were just able to start completing them almost right off the bat, and it didn't really take them much time, and they were just running through all the dungeons for like the entire week, which is like super impressive, by the way. I don't know what it's like for other teams like Echo, for example, but goddamn, for most teams, like for our team, we take until a day or two before the actual matches, or like the day of the cup or the global finals, where we can like like comfortably run through the runs and just get reps in. And these guys had it on farm for like almost an entire week.
Yeah, that's like being Echo Simulator for the last 4 years. I feel like think about the difference. Think about how much stronger you would be in a tournament if you felt like you're just getting to the point before you're insane innovating and teching stuff out, where you feel comfortable in your maps a week ahead of time versus 2 days before. That is just being better at practice and routing and things like that, and having to try less things because you get it right first, right? I feel like that is what Echo has done. That is, if you were to just have an insight on people's practice and you were seeing Echo just absolutely dunk on people for the last couple of years, I bet that's the difference. Like, they are the team that is ready days before you, so they're more consistent in tournament because they just literally are they were more consistent days before you were. And that also gives them more time to be like, okay, so these runs are great, right? How can they be better? And then that's when you see the Echo stuff that you see in cups, is because they have literally days to come up with that stuff after they are done optimizing, right? And everyone else is just struggling to get their runs perfect, right? It's just the practice time diff is just so massive.
Yeah, I actually had this talk with my team. We had like a little team talk because like we're going through like the whole spiraling downwards. Everyone's depressed because it's like, oh man, like we're short on time. And I was just saying how like, look, all these other teams, they have all this time to do all this crazy shit because they have the time. And I was telling my team like, oh, we gotta stop focusing on trying to do crazy shit and stop fucking up and stop fucking around, like doing all these different things. Just like get down the basics and try to at least complete runs and just get something going before we start going for crazier shit. Because that's really been the big difference between a lot of the teams. I think almost every single team was able to get down the basics, but it was a matter of how long it took. And I'm sure teams like Echo and Mandatory, they were done with that well in advance, and they just had all this extra time to do all this like super cool tech. Because we actually had a lot of ideas in mind, especially Smack. Smack loves doing crazy shit, but we just never had time to do these crazy things. Otherwise, we were just like wasting our time, or like we're just doing inconsistent runs.
Okay, well, so the MDI is over. We are moving forward into a different phase of this expansion. Uh, there is a thing coming up before Faded, that obviously has not been announced yet. But I think a lot of us are looking forward to whatever that is. But season 4, I actually kind of wanted to get some takes from you guys, because I've noticed that this on Twitter recently has kind of taken a turn. Like, I think Faded, when it came out last expansion, was like, oh, this is kind of just better than Sepulcher being out for another 5 months and no new Mythic Plus season and all that stuff. And then I think we haven't learned anything about it. It sounds like we're going to get our first taste of this tomorrow. So we can probably hit this a little harder next week. But what are you guys looking for? And is the rotating raids thing again acceptable to you? And just in general for the community, I think the initial thought was, oh, well, this is just a cheap excuse for a patch now that they did it last time. Like, last time it was cool. This time it's like, oh, well, they liked it, so we can just not put in some work. We didn't get another raid this patch. But like in general, are you guys looking forward to this? I know there was some weird information out there. I think it was either Holly Longdale or Ian or someone, I think, literally said we're going to have rotating raids in Faded again, like those exact words. But then I heard Towley recently on his stream say, they're not rotating raids this time. And if you guys don't know anything about Towley, shout out Towley, but he has more
The
connections
ultimate
at
leaker.
Blizzard. He has more connections at Blizzard than anyone by far, and he doesn't give a fuck. Like, he will just say whatever. So because he just has like he just doesn't care. He's been here, right? He's been around. So like maybe they're not doing that, but like I don't know. What do you get? What do you guys want to see that wouldn't be cringe and you don't think the community would hate?
I hope it's not like last time, because I think a lot of guilds are in this position right now. So this is for the raid side. For the dungeon side, I think being like last time would probably be fine. But
It's like a regular season, right?
yeah,
Like, I
just
don't-
do a new
yeah.
season, new dungeons. Cool.
Yeah.
That'll be fine.
Maybe
Kind of-
experiment a little bit, but
Yeah.
same shit.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see some experimentation in dungeons, but I don't think it's necessary. On the raid side, I think a lot of guilds are in a position now where the prospect of having some like moderately difficult stuff during farm that's going to require people to log in and like gear characters and then struggle against fights that they've already beaten for, you know, like all the annoyance and none of that joy of killing a boss for the first time, is really bad. Like I think that faded formula needs to not come back. It's like my guild, we're gonna be okay, I think, if they do that. But I know there are some guilds that aren't, and we are even having problems with like just everybody kind of on a different page with what we're expecting to do during a faded season, and whether we're gonna, you know, try and actually do the faded mythic bosses early on or ignore it, or what's the idea there. I know there are some guilds that are just like, yeah, we're not going to do faded, but whether you choose to do it or choose not to do it, there's going to be people in your guild that aren't happy, and that always really sucks.
So what do you think they should do, Dranos? Is there
I think they should just like
solutions to this raid situation?
I think they've changed it. I think
hope
they
so.
were rotating raids. Like when they had that post, it was like rotating raids, and I was even like, I think people generally like this. It was okay last time. And then since then, the opinion has been overwhelming. Well, opinions about WoW are always overwhelmingly negative, but it's been extra overwhelmingly negative. And I think a lot more viewpoints have been seen now that weren't there before. So, like, last expansion, I think there was this small crowd that was crying out, kind of like, we can't just keep progressing these raids and then next week we have to like go to a new one and we forget all that progression. And then we've also heard this increasing narrative of, hey, we're just trying to keep our guild alive until the war within, and like farm isn't becoming any easier anyway. Dobby made some great points about that, because they're tuned for such a high eye level that you don't like outscale the content like you used to. So like you're just kind of pulling the bosses and like it's just the same and it's not any easier. So like now it's like a new season. Plus, like, I don't know, last expansion it was kind of cool to go back to Castle Nathria, but is anyone trying to do Mythic Razageth again if it was tuned back up? Like I can't imagine someone wanting to do that. So like, yeah, I think they might have pivoted because Towley leaks shit for sure, and he doesn't give a fuck. So he's probably not lying. And Holly Longdale, someone can maybe pull this up. I'm like almost positive that she said verbatim, we're going to see all the Dragonflight raids again, or something like that.
Yeah, Frank will put the relevant quote on the screen now, so he'll find that.
it, Frank.
Yeah.
And
Frank.
yeah, just find it, buddy. But I think they might have pivoted. Like I don't know if they had enough time to do that, but like maybe they did that and they were like, wait, everyone hates this. Is there anything else we can do to make this like cooler? And I don't know what that would be, but I would love for it not to be the rotating raids thing, because I can't even last time, like, I don't know, my guild woke up at 10 a.m. and we did Castle Nathria and it was kind of fun. Like there's like new affixes and stuff. Like that would not be the case this time. Like if I posted that we are waking up at 10 a.m. tomorrow to do Faded Vault of the Incarnates, like I would get fucking laughed at. Like they'd be like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, why would we do that? Who cares? Right? And there's so much idea behind in WoW. It doesn't matter what content you're doing. It's just like a new patch starts and you have a new set of gear and you got to just make yourself stronger. And it's the same thing. It's like, well, this has kind of proved that wrong, because people are like, I would have liked a new raid and I definitely don't want to do this again. So I don't know how they're going to do it.
Yeah, I heard all the Liquid boys are playing SOD. Yeah, I mean, what
Is that
could they
true?
realistically
I don't think
do?
that's true. But okay.
That's what Yip said. He was like, everyone's just on SOD. His friends, yeah, but I mean, what can they even do? Because I feel like there has to be something like bringing back some old raid and tuning it up, right? Like bring back Throne of Thunder and then try to make it an actual challenging raid. I don't know. I feel like there's like no real solution to bringing back raids or sticking with the same raid for the rest of the patch. For me personally, the whole thing Dobby said about the raid being easier after farm goes so hard for me. Because like once we're on farm, I just want easy bosses. I just want to be able to go in there and just like steamroll everything with the gear I
Yeah.
have and not have to like fucking reprog fight or like, maybe people are kind of just like slacking and it's farm, they just want to chill, farm logs or whatever. Like
And this is true
I
at
hate
all
that
levels.
so
This is true at
much.
all levels. There's not a top level guild or a low level cutting edge guild or in the middle. Literally everyone wants farm to just be over fast. No one's trying to struggle through that shit.
Yeah, so I mean, if they can just like do that with Faded, I'd be so down for it because like I don't give I don't give much of a fuck about reprogging Faded raids. I just want to go into Faded raids and just like bang him out super quick and just get some gear and
Yeah,
slam
make
the
them
new
super
season event
easy.
plus. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that'd
I think
be
you're
a
definitely
good
right.
solution for me, but I don't know
Yeah.
what you guys feel about it because
Like
how
the
do you
farm-
because the situation is still how do you keep your guild alive, right? That's the biggest thing.
I think they just got to make us overpowered again. Like I remember Nyalotha farm, deep into Nyalotha farm, where you're coming in with like 100 corruption resistance you didn't have on prog, and you're just
Yeah, just killing a
blasting the
1 2 minute
bosses
boss.
and
Yeah,
one
that's great.
healing, and like you can do whatever you want, and that I think we would have some fun with that kind of thing. But yeah, like I remember going into Castle Nathria Faded and being like, okay, let's try and stack 20 people for Sire to Nathrias, right? And like just do the whole thing on the first frontal and just blast the boss. And like that, even spending like 30 minutes learning how to do that and figuring it out and then doing that was really fun then. And there's 0% chance that I'll be able to get my guild interested in any amount of that kind of struggle in these 3 raids this time around. Like it's not going to happen. I don't know. I can't do it, right? So I think they have to. I think the target should be like late Nyalotha farm, something like the Legion, end of Legion experience, where it's like, you have you remember when our artifacts were going out of control or whatever and had just zillions of power spiking or whatever. Like, you give us something like that and we kind of log in and we blast some content with that, and it's like easy faded versions of all 3 raids or just a mirror still or all 3. I mean, that would be fine. But I don't really want to have to like redo even Razageth assignments and stuff and like have the people who didn't
gosh.
prog it with us the first time. Like I don't know. I don't know if I have the stomach for that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it needs to be easy. In fact, we haven't heard any information. We could be Dobby about Faded all we want. We don't really know what it's going to be yet, but like I would love to see some kind of like literally just make like corruption. Like just put corruption in season 4, like copy paste, like every week you get a little bit stronger or something and you can equip some of these powers and you're getting that borrowed power feel. I think entire expansions being built around that were proven to be really problematic, but I think once you have a really good structure of an expansion, what else are you really trying to accomplish in season 4, right? Like let's get a little wild. I think Dragonflight it's a rebuilding expansion. They were rebuilding a lot of core elements of the game. I think it's okay to get a little wild at the end. That'd be fun.
Yeah, problem with adding borrowed power at the very end of the expansion is that one of the big downsides of borrowed power is the withdrawal when it goes away, and we would still get that then at the start of War Within. But I agree, and I agree with you. I think it would be worth the that downside to. I mean, literally, you could put corruption in basically as it was. It would be fitting. War Within's like void themed, sort of. I think that would be good, but I just hope it's not the same faded as last time for raids. How about for dungeons though? Do we want to talk? Obviously, very soon after this podcast comes out, there is going to be that dungeon post. So. I guess a lot of us will be speculating on that, but is there anything you guys are hoping to see in the season 4 dungeon changes ahead post tomorrow?
I really hope we see some type of testing of something new, because if it's just like, we all speculating they're just gonna bring back the 8 Dragonflight dungeons, except there's nothing new, I find that to be like really lame. Like, yeah, I would like to do Ruby Life pools and Algafar again and stuff, but if it's just gonna be the same shit without like seasonal affixes or something different, that'd be kind of boring.
You need some cooking. You need them to cook a little bit.
Yep, and I
That's
want
what
to
you're
see
saying.
some experimentation. In fact, like, what if they had? How do you guys feel about like if they had like some type of community voted shit to just like try shit out for faded stuff? I
What do
feel
you
like
mean?
that'd go kind of hard. I don't know, just
Like, what are you voting on?
like say like if you're voting on like specific affixes, or like if you're voting on like something to do with speed running, maybe just like something different, right? Something different from the usual M plus formula.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I want to jump in here. I found a couple of anecdotes. So Franck did find some things from the Forbes.com interview, but I'm also going to post something here. I did find the Holly Longdale post. So this is exactly what they said. Blah, blah, blah. Like we've talked about 2023, going into 2024. The War Within releases next year. Dragonflight Season 4 will revisit Dragonflight's dungeons and raids, along with outdoor content featuring updated rewards and a few new twists, right? And then, as you said in the Forbes interview, when asked about Faded Raids in Dragonflight, Hazukosta said they will return, though perhaps called something else. We're bringing forward everything pretty much from the Shadowlands Season 4, except for the new raid affixes, the mechanical modifiers. So it's really just more, let's bring all 3 raids back in rotation, let's bring all the Dragonflight dungeons back as Dragonflight Seasonal Mythic Plus pool and close out the season that way. So I don't know when that interview is from, but they said no affixes. I think the affixes were kind of stinky anyway. That was from November of last year, so kind of a while ago, around the same time that Holly said these things too. But then recently, Tally said that they weren't rotating, and he would know. So I don't know. We might have to wait and see. But I would definitely like to see that. Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a player happiness standpoint. All right. I know theme is everything, but in Season 4, you can probably throw some theme out the window. I don't know. All 3 raids are back in a patch. We're kind of just gaming at this point, right? Like, if there's a community vote to try seasonal affixes again, and then we got to try one of our seasonal affixes from the past, and Encrypted won that vote, and they just slammed Encrypted into these dungeons, that would be insane. That would make these dungeons so much better because Encrypted was awesome, right? Like something like that, or just messing around with what High Mythic Plus even looks like. I still think there's this huge divide between these players get KSM, and then you want to get a little bit higher rating for your tier piece, and then you want to get all your 20s done to get these portals, and then like that's clearly the culmination of all of the value in doing Mythic Plus, and then it drops off a fucking mountain, and then an extremely small amount of people push rating for a title, and no one else gives a shit, and also those people are like the prevailing, like, complaining about things being overtuned because it's infinite scaling, and then like no one else relates to it because they're not actually having that happen in their 20s, and building some bridge between high and low, or reimagining what high keys are. Like I think there's so much room to cook there in the season, especially because the people who are playing in Season 4, the number of more casual players actually dwindles throughout the expansion, and the people who are like kind of gaming all the time are always there. So like Season 4 can be a little bit more tailored towards them, right? They're making an outdoor zone, according to this. For a lot of other people, maybe try to reimagine what High Mythic Plus actually looks like, or maybe developing a reward path that incentivizes actually going higher, I think is what I would like to see.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is that a community vote, even if the proportion of high-end players to low-end players has increased for the high-end players over the course of the expansion, just due to, people kind of more casual players just playing at the start of an expansion and then waiting for the next one. Like, it's still overwhelmingly populated by players like that. So if you do a poll for like when we saw which dungeons should we do in Shadowlands Season 4 as a poll, I think a lot of people were pretty unhappy with the ones that were chosen as a result among the like high-end crowd. So if they were to do a vote about like, hey, which seasonal affix should we add back in for this season, I think that would also maybe fall prey to the same kind of idea.
No. There's no way people would vote for like Infested, for example.
I mean, if you're confident, Dorki, then
they might vote for Prideful though.
Yeah,
no, a lot of people who did 15. A lot of people who did 15.
That'd be more acceptable.
Love
I feel
Prideful.
like.
Yeah, and also Prideful could very easily be made to be very good for the people who disliked it, and it's just making it stop scaling at a certain point.
That's true. That would be an easy fix.
Like you could change that in 2 seconds. But I actually think that the whole community votes have gone better than people. Like if you remove the votes that they did in the MDI about like people were like, let's give these MDIers hell, and they voted for the craziest affixes in that one tournament. Like the votes have actually been good. Like Grimrail, like if you remember back into WoD, like all these people who play at a high level were probably screaming like, oh man, there wasn't affixes in WoD, and affixes are going to be a big problem on this train. But everyone else was like, Grimrail Depot was cool, and it is cool, right? So that's why, and it's really short. So that's why they selected that. That choice made sense. But then they recently let us vote on tier sets, And we went over how maybe there was a way to do that better, to where, you know, you could have just done more than just, hey, just vote on this. But like almost all of those didn't get trolled, and they were like what are seen as the correct choices, right? I have more faith in a voting system with the whole like body of WoW players than I think most do. Like most not weird MDI votes have gone the way you'd expect them to go.
Yeah, like I'm sure if they asked the community to vote on an affix to be removed, I'm sure a lot of them would say like sanguine or some shit.
Oh, they'd
Would
say
be a good
bolstering.
affix to remove. Yeah, but I think
Yeah,
bolstering.
I'd say
would be-
bolstering for sure, because like especially the recency bias of this specific patch, there's a few very problematic bolstering dungeons too. So, and also they should remove bolstering. I think. Like I still think it just
they
sucks.
removed it in
Just-
MDI.
or nerf it real bad. Like nerf it a lot, to where it doesn't matter. Because it turns out the closer affixes get to not impacting you at all, the better they are perceived by everyone who does Mythic Plus, which is maybe also a time to reimagine what affixes look like, because that sounds really fucking stupid. If what you initially made was, hey, these affixes are make the dungeons feel different and they matter, and then it's like, okay, well, the more they matter, the more everyone universally hates them. Maybe this whole thing doesn't make sense in the first place. So, again, you guys might be listening to this, and we already found out tomorrow that they've fixed Mythic Plus forever and it's perfect, and we're just speculating about nothing, but could happen.
Bro, I'm so hyped for it. You got
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
hyped.
Pretty
I'm
cool.
really hyped for 10.2.6. I know we can't talk about that yet, but well, I mean, it's kind of. I mean, we could remove this from the podcast if we could, but like obviously, there's a lot of creators know for a reason, and I think at least what I feel comfortable in saying is I think it's really really fucking cool. Like I don't think it's a thing that people are going to be like, oh, this is stupid. I strongly think it's going to be very cool and very popular, and
Yeah.
I think people should look forward to it.
I think a lot of people are just kind of a pretty doomer about both season 4 and 10.2.6, and they're kind of conflating the two. And there's this sort of general
Extremely
feel.
different.
Yeah, and I do think that there's kind of no solution to that besides Blizzard like talking about what is actually happening. But Blizzard has decided that they want to preserve mystery for 10.2.6, and they want to delay season 4 stuff, and especially the season 4 PTR until 10.2.6 is out. And that might well pay off for them, but at least until something happens, people are going to feel bad about it, and I think that makes sense. So, but I think we're approaching now the period of time where the curtain's going to come up, and we'll see if it was all worth it. Because I know that for the longest time, people in World of Warcraft have talked about how they don't want the game to be this game where everything is data mined and done on PTR for like months before you can actually play it, and now Blizzard's basically doing that with 10.2.6, right? Like that patch is going to come out. There's going to be some lead up time, I guess, where people will maybe know what's going on in it, but there's not going to be PTR, and we have no idea how many weeks before the patch there's going to be actually any information. So Blizzard are kind of actually trying to do that thing that people have been asking for a really long time, and I hope it goes well, because I think that WoW, as somebody who largely makes a living off of doing the PTR stuff whenever it's around, I think WoW would be better if they didn't need a PTR, right? And if they could just drop
Correct.
stuff on us by surprise, like that would own.
Oh my god, yeah, me too.
Totally
Like my
generous
and
panel of
this
people.
would really suck for Frank specifically,
Oh, yeah.
and also me. Like the amount of content and how much I love talking about PTR, but man, if we could like just thinking about the race, if we could just log in and like we're learning the names of these bosses as we're seeing them. Oh my god! I mean that I know the Race World First gets literally millions of viewers and hundreds of thousands concurrently at all times. I think that would make the race twice as popular, just flat immediately. Like that would be insane. I think.
Oh, 100%. Like imagine people seeing the jailer for the very first time and not knowing like who the final boss was.
Well,
it's,
no,
I mean, it's
the
kind of like the
jailer-
Lost Ark thing.
The jailer we actually knew about since Warcraft 3.
Okay,
There was a
well,
really big lore build.
Okay, all right, yeah, sure, yeah, okay. No,
Yeah,
but like
I
actually
agree,
though, like in Lost Ark, that was a huge thing. Like when people like got to see that one dude that was like the Lich King of their game for the first time, like it was like so pog. People were popping off, and people were crying and shit. Like yeah, that would go hard.
Yeah.
Also, this 10.2.6 thing, it is interesting they're keeping it quiet. Like, I feel like if it was announced, it would be extremely... People are waiting for this to come out. But I wonder if that's going to pay off for them. Like at least it kind of seems like they're going for. I think the only game that I can remember in gaming culture that has done this is Apex Legends. Like Apex went live one day and like Shroud and Ninja and all these streamers are streaming it, and there wasn't any advertising campaign. They just paid these streamers millions of dollars to go live and play this game, and it blew up. And because it was a good game, right? That seems to be the closest thing to what they're doing here. I don't know if they're paying any streamers to play it or anything, but I know that when people hear about what this is and they log on Twitch and they see people doing it, they're going to be like, "Oh, that's a sick idea," and they're going to log in and try it. I think it's going to be massive. I hope it's made well for sure.
All right, we've been rambling about stuff for a little while. How do we feel about moving on to our Patreon question for the week?
Yeah, let's slam it.
All right, we've got another multi-paragraph one this time around. This time around, though, I haven't pre-read it, so you'll have to bear with me. It's going to be a little while. From a civilian raid leader that says, I raid log in a 1,000 plus cutting edge guild 2 nights. I'm 488 eye level with only one piece in the entire game that's an upgrade. I haven't killed Mythic Fireack yet. I've never felt this geared before in any tier since being a cutting edge raider in Argus. I feel that my main character will have no further progression incentives at all if I kill Mythic Fireack. I also have an alt at 486 eye level, which I basically do weekly keys and heroic clears with a relatively strict 12 hours a week of playtime. I've never had time to gear an alt until this expansion. I don't feel like I've really tried that hard to get gear with this alt. The only mythic boss it's killed is Gnarlroot once. Am I lucky, or is this current state of gear progression too quick? Are the easy sources of high-level BIS gear via the Catalyst, Mythic Track plus 18s, Crest upgrade system too easy and bad for the game? Should someone who may not kill the hardest raid boss or do anything higher than a 22 be able to achieve full BIS gear? And Sidecook, should the vault tokens, which I have no use for on my main, be used as profession materials to add tertiaries to gear? To add an additional layer or grind to the ultimate BIS to fill in time between major content patches?
Insane question.
Big one, yeah. We'll take the side cook later. Yeah. But I think the initial part of this is just like, are we too BIS too quickly, or without needing to do too much content, without needing to continue gearing our characters after playing for a couple of months?
So
the whole Mythic raid talk, pretty much, right?
Well, it's not. I think this heavily involves Mythic Plus too. I like this. This involves PvE as a whole, because something they've tried to do a lot this expansion is make, even from the very beginning, they added like more gear, eye level upgrades throughout the levels of Mythic Plus. Like this whole expansion, they've really focused on Mythic Plus being a really popular game mode and making that more relevant for obtaining the best gear in the game. But what it has done for sure has lowered the progression over time. Or like, I guess it makes it faster to get to a point where it's like you're barely going to get any stronger, and then it just seems like you sit for a while. Where when you got all of your best gear from Mythic rating, every reset you re-cleared and you felt significantly stronger, and it seemed like you just kind of could infinitely get stronger. And that also kind of ties into like how people feel about refarming these raids and how they feel like they're not getting more powerful, because the upgrade system is so crazy. But I also think the upgrade system is great. But I do think it is worth bringing up that it could be bad for the game. I remember me and Dratnos fighting a horde of people, figuratively, in Season 2, because they had a version of this upgrade system that was way more OP, and this problem was way worse. You were actually full BIS in like 3 weeks. It was nuts, right? And I remember saying on stream, like, I don't know if this is really good, actually. And then, like, just every Mythic Pluser on the planet was like, no, shut up. Like, they're going to nerf it.
Yeah,
like,
shut up, Max.
Like, give me all my gear instantly. I just want to be full BIS and just play the game. And it's like, I think
so true.
There's a lot of people, just like this civilian raid leader, who feel like throughout the patch, this introduces new problems, a lot of which we've discussed recently with all the talk around Mythic rating. And that slower progression makes you feel like, I've used the Diablo analogy before, but it's basically like you play a Diablo 2 season, not Diablo 4, or Diablo 3 season, not Diablo 4. You like log in and like it's constant dopamine for like 2 days, and then you get your whole build, and then it's like, okay, I'm waiting 6 hours for an upgrade, and it's like, okay, all that steam is gone, and it's I don't want to play anymore. And MMOs are more than that. WoW is more than that. But going throughout the season, you are getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and that feeling of not only doing content that you enjoy, but also that there is a reward from that in your character getting stronger. The combination of those two things is really what makes MMOs great, or any RPG great. And that has earlier in the season now, you feel like you're just playing the game with no reward, and that's almost directly what he's addressing. And it's basically that feeling versus I want to just be stronger faster, especially from the Mythic Plus community. But I think this is the majority of the game feels like the civilian raid leader does. And I think the very loud, very high key pushing Mythic Plus specific oriented player are the people on the other side of the token that are like, no, give me my gear immediately. I just want to play the game. But I don't think that I would love, this is actually something where I think having experiences and opinions that don't come from us, because we're kind of projecting what we hear and what we have these people tell us about how this is. And I've over time got more and more casual viewers in my stream. Your viewer count goes up, more of your viewers are casual, right? That's how that works. And I hear this a lot from them. They're like, I'm playing these seasons not as long because it just feels like that drive to log in and play when there isn't gear progression anymore is just, you're fed too much dopamine early instead of spreading it out. And while that has had its advantages, I think it has hurt part of the game. I don't know, Dratnos. I know, or Dorki, you sound like you have
Yeah,
something.
so I was gonna say, like, I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think what M plus players want is fast gear. I think it's more of that they want competitive gear with rating. So I think that's like two massive distinctions. Like, if a player was able to get gear over the course of like 4 months versus 2 months, I think a lot of people players would be fine with a 4 month gearing process. The problem is for Mythic Plus, for the longest time, they've never been able to reach the same highs that a Mythic Raider would be able
But
to
they
achieve.
kind of do now, right?
They kind of do now, right? But like the
Closer
big
than
thing
ever,
is,
yeah.
yeah, the big thing is that Raiders have had access to this gear for the longest time, and M Plus didn't. But it's not about like how quick or how slow it is to get. Well, I would say
Okay,
like,
so I misunderstood the blowback, and maybe Dratnos can speak on this too,
yeah,
that I saw in season 2. It wasn't Mythic Plus were saying, I want to be BIS in 2 weeks. They were saying, this is the first
I
time we've
want to
had
have
rate
the same
equivalent
gear
gear.
that
This is
raid
the
gear
first
would
time I've
get.
had rate equivalent
Right,
gear, and I don't want to lose that. But at the
right.
same, what do you think, Dratnos?
There was a lot of people as well that were just like, I can only play this game for 27 minutes every 2 weeks, and then I gotta, go take care of my wife and 4 kids or whatever. And so, now I finally have good gear, and you want to take that away from me. And I always thought that was a bit of a misplaced, because I think both you and I had concerns with the upgrade system that were basically like, if you played the game 70 hours a week 1 and 2, you were full BIS, and like that was what we wanted to nerf, not somebody who could gear up more quickly than they ever could before over the first few weeks. So, but the concern of like M plus players versus raid players, like, yeah, I mean, I think M plus players, the gearing for them is in a pretty good place right now where like you can actually get, it's not just the myth track gear, it's also like the state of crafted gear, right? You can just get 486s in all your slots if you want at this point in the season. I don't know. I mean, like, I kind of feel like this is similar to when artifact power went away and people like THD are out here like, this was actually good for everybody. And
No, not that.
I'm sitting back here like,
and-
I actually don't. I think this is great. I think the current upgrade system is in a good place. Like, I think that the downside of after a couple months into a patch, your main is fully geared. I don't think that's a downside. I think that's an upside. I think when we compare it to previous patches where it's like, hey, it's 5 months into the patch and my main still doesn't have every item I want, like, that sucked for me. I hated that. I hated not being full build and not having control over being full build. And, if we didn't re-clear every boss I wanted in a week, that sucked. Or if we couldn't re-kill the final boss for a few weeks after killing it the first time and I just didn't get my item, I never got my gavel during all of Season 3. Like, those feelings sucked and made me played the game a lot less than I have been playing this season. Now this season I haven't played too much in the past few weeks, but like I've been playing quite a bit more, I would say, over the course of this season and last season than I did in an average season.
Actually, that's true. I
Yeah.
played a lot more this season than I normally do. Yeah.
You know, maybe as the season winds down towards the end, you find a point where you're going to stop playing. But we did that before as well. It's just sometimes we did it before where we were just frustrated and we're like, okay, I'm never going to get my gavel. I don't care. I'm out of here, right? Like, catch me next season. So I don't know. I think that this is it is a downside for some players, but I think that it's a worth downside. I do think if they can come up with cool ideas to try and mitigate it without removing the progress they've made, I'm all for that. I think there's cool stuff there. And I think that another downside that I'm less convinced isn't a big deal is the fact that becoming so powerful so early in the patch makes it hard for gear to automatically nerf the raid like it used to.
This is a big topic.
That's something that I also think is a sizable thing that needs some more cook for sure.
And they've cooked it in the past. Like you mentioned on another podcast that like they used to have that War Screams buff or
Hell
whatever.
Screams War Song, hell yeah.
Yeah, so like you every week you logged in, like you just got stronger throughout the season, and it just buffed you, or you could debuff the raid over time, and it accomplishes the same thing. I actually have a theory, and I want to hear your all's opinion on it. So for the longest time, I have never really I publicly in interviews, whatever, I've never made the argument that they should. I always so funny. I always have to preface what I say with this. I've never argued that they should balance for the race and versus everyone else. But I actually think that the new upgrade system has interacted with the race in such a multiplicative, almost probably like quadratic, crazy scaling way in how we get gear initially, that while something is made really well for the rest of the game, I do think the Race World First specifically has a bad impact on this because they have not found out a way to nerf how much we can exploit this system the first time it comes out. So we are able to get infinite helpers and we can save all of our crests until we have like every single item, and then it's like how complicated it is to make sure you're saving is getting as much eye level as possible. It led to us killing Tindril at 480.8 item level and Fireack, I think, at 481. Guys, it's the second week of the patch. No one else was close to that, right? So Blizzard tunes these last couple bosses for exactly what our guilds are at the time, right? They constantly make health nerfs because they're just insane. They nerf them to basically exactly what we can do. Now imagine if they found a way to make us not able to exploit the gearing system so much in the first week. Maybe make tier, you can't get above 3-piece in week 1 or something, and you don't have access to that. There's some issues with that, but just like, let's just say, like, I don't know, somehow instead of us being 480 on Tindril, we're like 474. They would make Tindril killable for us at 474. And they'd make Fireack killable at 476. And when you guys are fighting Fireack right now, you'd be 12 eye levels higher than when we did it. And not 4. Right? So I think that, and especially how hard Tindril and Fireack were, and this isn't the first time that hard bosses have been at the end of the raid, right? Like how much the race has scaled and how much better Liquid and Echo have got over the years. That like Fallen Avatar and Kil'jaeden happened before any of that, right? Like this has been happening for a while. Sometimes there's raids with 2 crazy hard bosses. But I think this patch specifically, not only were these bosses super hard, but you guys didn't have any much more gear than we did when we did them because of how crazy we could exploit the system. And I think if you just replay this patch and our gear is nerfed from 482 on Fireack to 476, I bet the majority of these problems are gone. And I think people feel stronger every week, and they actually get to these bosses and you don't have to change anything with anyone else. It's literally just us. And these bosses are so much more achievable for people once they get higher eye level.
Yeah, that personally is my biggest problem with the gearing currently. I feel like if you're 2 months into the patch, 3 months, 4 months, whatever, like how many months are we at right now? 4 or some shit? Like at this point in the patch, I feel like these bosses should be significantly easier because of your gear and not because of the mechanics. I feel like, if you get hit by like one of those firestormy thingies in Tindril, like it should not kill you with this amount of gear. That's like a more natural way of nerfing the fights. And something that accomplishes that really well that we've talked about earlier was corruption, actually. Like, part of what made that corruption patch so fun was, like, towards the end of the patch, you were just so fucking strong that, like, you just kind of steamrolled through all these bosses, and we don't really get that feeling
Nothing
anymore
like
in
that
Mythic
exists
Raid.
anymore. Yeah.
Right, right. And I feel like something like that would actually be great to have, something that's, like, time gated, and
And that
as time goes
also
on,
makes
as
them
the patch goes
over
on, you just feel
rely.
mad strong.
It makes them over rely on nerfs too. Like if people aren't getting passively stronger, and people just in general, even if getting passively stronger and something being nerfed are literally the same thing, I guess like getting naturally stronger is more organic and it's more linear and it's like gradual. And I guess
And it
nerfs are
feels
these.
good, too.
Yeah, and it feels good. And nerfs are these big, obvious, like huge drops in difficulty instantly, right? And that feels so much worse. But they've had to over rely on nerfs because we scale so strong so fast. And the race to world first, while you could have so many conversations about how they should do that, everyone's had them. But like even just literally right now, all you do is nerf how much gear we have in the first week or two. Just us, which it is different than everyone else. We are doing something different than everyone else is. Guess what your guild is not doing? Having thousands of helpers show up to runs and you getting all the gear on Fired Up's 8th mage to make sure he has the best geared one possible. Like it's completely fucking insane, right? Like we are able to do things that no one else is. Nerf that, and I think it immediately solves multiple problems in the game for everyone else, and
All
is
right.
less crane.
I think first of all, just really great question. So well done, civilian raid leader. Should we address that side cook as well? What do you guys think about the
100%.
The idea of vault tokens being usable to add tertiaries to gear? It's something that I've considered stuff like this before. Like it would kind of extend the runway of how long your character does gain something each week, right? Like if you could turn 6 cresty thingies or whatever tokens of merit into a scroll of avoidance for a piece of gear or a scroll of leech or something, like it would extend how long your character's getting better, and it would kind of remove some of that RNG of whether you get avoidance and leech from lucky drops, you could eventually force it. I don't know.
I have spoken to a Blizzard gearman about this exact issue. And I know at least the tertiary thing that got back to me was that tertiaries are so good and that having max avoidance is so overpowered. And for a lot of classes, especially healers, having full leech is super overpowered. That if you left season 1 with like full avoidance and leech on every piece of your gear, you would feel more and more inclined to not replace it with anything until you could get the same
That's
thing.
100% true.
Yeah, so that is the main reason why. But then there's an entirely other conversation about should the eye level go up so much and should every piece of gear you have be completely invalidated as soon as the new season starts? There's pros and cons to that, right? So like, but at least in their current ideology, it totally makes sense that you can't do something like that. But you hit on something really, really smart, Mr. Civilian Raid Leader. The vault has so much value and power and is very good, just objectively for a while, and then it's not, and then it starts becoming insanely boring. And currently, the system for that is you obtain vault tokens, and at least for a few weeks, when you brick a vault, you get like a socket, and sockets are good, right? And then it's just completely irrelevant for a while. And I just think they could do more. And they could even implement this later into a patch because that's when it only happens anyway, to do it. And I know something that I brought up to the Blizzard Gearman is like, could you add a track jump? Could you,
Hell yeah.
for 12 or 18 tokens, so you brick a couple vaults like a month or two into or 2 or 3 months into the season, you now have this heroic track item and you haven't been able to get it on the mythic track, but then like that makes those vaults feel valuable even if you're not getting gear from them. And it is a way to make the vault tokens more valuable, and it also allows you to kind of add dinar, right? Like what dinar was it gave you a normal item of anything in any raid, and then you used the upgrade system in the last season 4 to make it bigger, right? So all you have to do is obtain this thing on heroic, and then you've got it on mythic as long as you get a vault track jump, right? So I think there's cooks for stuff like that, and I think there's ways for them to innovate. I don't think it doesn't have to be done in vault tokens. This can be done in plenty of other ways to implement something like this. But I think that specifically the vault could have so much more value if the vault token system or the vaults in general somehow increased in value over time to make them still something you look forward to every week rather than it falling off a mountain in what you look forward to on Tuesday.
Yep, agreed. I hate tertiaries, so I would say no to that. In fact, I feel like they should remove tertiaries from the game. They are so problematic in multiple levels. especially for M plus. Like I don't know if it'd be the same. I could say the same for raid, but
No,
Dude,
I mean,
they're absolutely a problem.
Dude, it
I think
feels
you're-
so
you're-
bad for me this season because I'm like trying to push keys on an Og Evoker that I
hate it.
just sort of geared up, but like I don't have avoidance, so I'm like gemming verse and stuff. And
Yeah,
oh,
dude.
God.
Honestly, I think they've kind of put themselves into a corner with how defensives works in this game and versatility and avoidance and things like that. I actually do think it probably hurts the game, and I don't even think people actually like why it exists. Is it's a way to like it existed since the Titan Forge system, and it's a way to like you can get your item, but you could potentially get a better version of that item. It's not Titan Forge anymore, and you can't get a random socket that's like 10 times better than a Titan Forge, but you can still get this like little thing that helps you a lot. But it's turned into not this little thing. And like turns out like when most things that kill you are reducible by avoidance, it's just extremely fucking OP and required. And it also is a Race to World First issue too. We have more access to that. Guess what you can get when you run Fired Up's ninth mage through some splits? Oh, well, he probably has a 15% avoidance instead of 5, right? And that's just like you're tuning these fights for these people with completely unrealistic gear, and it's harder to do. I actually think the defensive toolkit in this game should be nerfed for sure. I think it would make healing easier to balance and make more interesting. There's a couple really good videos about this. And I also think that it would make living on your own character more interesting. And I think avoidance and versatility and all these things lead to this being Blizzard wants to challenge you. That's the point of making hard content. And the only way they can challenge you is to try to one-shot you and make you be proactive with your buttons. And it would be way, way cooler if you saw your health going down and you're like, oh, wait, I might die soon. I should use my personal. That doesn't happen in Dragonflight. It used to happen. It doesn't happen now. What happens now is the second you realize with your peripheral vision that you should use a personal, you're already dead. And that's because of the class trees. It's because of a lot of things. And I just hope that they address this. And I actually think, right with what you're saying, Dorki, that tertiaries, I think overall do have a negative effect on the game. And they're not even cool. Like, I guess healers want to get leech on their gear, but it's like so fucking basic. Like, I don't know. They can do so much more.
Yeah, I mean, like the more I think about it, I really wish they cooked more on the idea of corruptions. There were just so many parts of corruption in that patch that were so great that they could utilize. And I don't know, it's just like something outside of gear that would really help with how your character progresses throughout the course of a patch.
Dude, that was one of the best Patreon questions ever. That was sick.
Yeah,
That
the
was
wall
so
of text ones are 2 for 2 on being really good questions.
Oh,
so.
true. Yeah, because like when
Yeah.
you start, and none of us pre-read this, we're just trusting Franck didn't pick a really bad Patreon question.
Not that any of you have submitted any of those.
Yeah, they're all very good, but
Yeah.
this one, you know, you kind of are expecting a lot, and this was awesome. So thank you, anonymous civilian raid leader. That was
Good
cool.
name too.
Yo, this episode was a little short, so we have added a bonus question. This is normally the kind of content you need to subscribe to our Patreon to see us answering extra questions, but we had a really good answer, we thought, to one recently, so enjoy. All right, our next question comes from Gonzo that says, it seems to me Blizzard is underutilizing cosmetics when it comes to rewards. I've played a lot of Path of Exile, same. And the rewards/MTX are extremely cool, from footprints to your character leaves behind, to different animations when you kill things, to changing the color and look of your abilities. A really cracked out cosmetic would be a chase item for a lot of people in the game, and it wouldn't even need to have player power tied to it. The legendary, for example, it's weak, it's a little boring, but what if instead of giving me a little power boost, it made me bigger, made my execute look cooler, or engulfed my character in fire? I'd still want that. I might even want it more. I'd even go back and farm an old expansion to get it. Same for the last few bosses of Mythic. It really does suck to beat the final boss on the hardest difficulty and then get an item that's only a slight improvement over what you currently have. Instead, maybe Fireark doesn't need to drop a bunch of items. Maybe by defeating Fireark on Mythic, you get a completely nuts transmog that's easy to recognize. Maybe everyone can just get really dope-looking flame weapons, or something that gives one of their main casts a special effect. Then there's a side question, but let's start with this one. So first of all, they've done this a couple times, right? Like Green Fire for Warlocks is an example of this.
Green Fire was huge.
Yeah, that was so cool. Like that it was a Warlock quest chain you could do that would make your spells green. Your fire would be green. And,
From where?
And it looked
As in Mop.
sick. It was
Yeah.
super cool, and every single Warlock it was like logging in just to do that. It was awesome.
Dude, I was actually thinking about this. I swear it feels like they used to have all these things. Like I didn't play in MoP, but it seems like MoP had all the super cool banger things. Like challenge mode gave some like super sick weapon transmogs, and it doesn't really feel like they have that nowadays. Maybe it's just me, but
Yeah, Green
mean,
Fire
that-
and like a couple of glyphs, but were the only real examples of doing like the equivalent to Path of Exile spell effect. Because in Path of Exile, like if you have a spell like Fireball, there's like 5 different fireballs in the store you can buy that look very different, and
that sounds cool.
it is cool. WoW explicitly doesn't want to do that because they want you to be able to recognize people's spells when you look at them and
Theme.
have them all be
Oh,
on
screw
theme and
that.
stuff. Which I do think that goal is worth keeping, but I think there's room for at least like more stuff like Green Fire, because you see a green incinerate, you still know it's an incinerate. It's just it's like a recolor here or there, like something themed around a historic character of like, you know, Khadgar's arcane missiles or whatever. If they look different, those kind of things, I feel like should be within they should still accomplish that goal and actually give you something like this. In terms of like last few bosses of Mythic giving you cosmetics as well, I mean, they do give you, right? Like, if you kill Mythic Fireack, you get, there's a mount, there's a dragon riding mount, and then it also comes with like a pet if you're a hunter you can tame if you get that. So like they add little bits of that here and there. There was a Razageth dragon riding customization. There was back in Trial of Valor, they did a transmog set. You guys remember the like there was that the Garb of the Chosen Dead or whatever. So like they do these things a little bit from time to time, but I agree that like they could do like 4 times as much. Yeah,
if they did, I think it's like almost a universal success rate when they do things like this. I think that you're totally right in that they could just lean more into that. I have kind of a side cook, not the sub question for you, but I've heard people talk about how raid should be like different difficulties. There's 2 difficulties in Mythic, and like Mythic shouldn't drop gear or whatever. I actually think the point at which Mythic gets out of control is very specifically the last 2 bosses of like this raid. And I actually wonder if you could phrase that argument different, where it's not heroic Fireack drops the best gear in the game. It's that Mythic Smolderon is the last boss that drops gear. And specifically, the last 2 bosses are purely aspirational cosmetic
Oh,
things.
that'd be sick.
Because like I think people are like, well, why would you do all of Mythic? But like, dude, you don't need Gnarl Root to drop cosmetics and have you zone in. It's fucking Gnarl Root. Like it can drop gear, and so can all of those bosses. But as soon as Blizzard gets to the point where they're making, I mean, the jump from Smolderon to Tendril is insane, right? It is a different difficulty straight up, right? And I think having those bosses is good. It could also allow them to remain more difficult for longer because you are going after something that you don't need for cutting edge. Like literally cutting edge could end at Smolderon, or something like that, right? You'd have to like rework a few of these things, but I wonder if I think that whole argument has always been splitting difficulty at the heroic and mythic line, but I think that's just way too extreme of a change. But I feel like this Smolderon to Tendril line is actually the perfect spot to have the aspirational, really fucking cool transmog or spell altering cosmetics or something that people want to continue. And your guild already got through Smolderon, and it's like, hey, do we still raid for the rest of the patch? Or like, it needs to be something cool enough where like all 20 people are like, holy shit, we need that, and we need to be one of the first few people in our server to like tout this around Valdrakken and just like show it off and be sick, you know? Because I think we've heard that from the community. Like, there's all these like anti-transmog. Being anti-transmog is a crazy take, but like one thing that I think they are right in that is like back in the day, like if you showed up with that Mog from like the current patch of killing the hardest boss, like you were the shit for a little bit. That's gone now because of transmog. That's pretty much the only argument against transmog that makes there's even somewhat coherent. But like you can kind of bring that back by having cooler cosmetics purely based on doing that. And I think it'd be interesting. What do you guys think about that? Just first off, is that sound like an awful idea?
Which one? The
The
last 2 bosses being
yeah.
cosmic only. I think that's a banger idea.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it achieves so much because like, do the last 2 bosses really need to drop better gear? I feel like when you're that deep in Mythic Raid, people don't really give a shit about the gear, do they? Like I feel like at that point it's more about the challenge and completing it, and having something to show off. That'd be really sick. Like imagine if everyone, like after you beat Mythic Varrock, everyone just gets access to the Varrock Legendary Axe Transmog, and it'd be badass.
It also solves the issue of some people could have the
Tuning,
take of tuning. They're like, oh well, like they're making this for world first players, and then that just like struggles so much. People say that Mythic is made for us. That is completely false. Having the opinion that Naimu and Laradar and Smolderon being tuned for us is crazy. I mean, we destroyed those bosses and they didn't bother buffing them. They were not made for us. They're made for people who are getting those bosses as their progression point that week, right? They do absolutely make Tendril and Fyrakk for exactly what we're able to do. And then other people get stronger over time and then they nerf it, right? But this also draws a direct line in the sand of like, these are the bosses we're making for you people, and these are the bosses we're making for everyone else. And you don't have to be a Mythic Pluser that wants the very rare thing off of Fyrakk and have to raid for 4 months just to get this Absorb Trinket at 496 eye level. Like, that's off Smolderon. That's you can do that for sure, right? So it lowers the barrier of entry for gear and also has a proper split at the actual difficulty level instead of the change from Heroic to Mythic.
Yeah, I think
gap
it's
is
a really
massive,
cool
too.
idea. Okay, yeah. The gap being
'cause,
massive
like-
between Tendril and Smolderon.
Well, no, not even that. Like just pre-nerfed and post-nerf. Because
Oh, okay.
like since I'm always playing with liquid people and stuff, everyone's always like, yeah, Tindril, Fyrakk, very complete piss now. And I'm like, bro, you guys are fucking insane. Like anytime anyone ever says that to me, whether it's like Goop or like Cryptics or whoever the hell, like any of these people say that, I'm like, do you guys even understand what you're saying? Like you might say these bosses are pissed now, but like to a lot of guilds, they are still absurdly hard.
Yeah, of course, but
And-
they're also not wrong. Like the boss that they killed, this is a
Yeah, relatively it is,
baby
but, like,
Jingly Keys baby boss compared to what it was, and they are right for them, but they are
But
also
that's why it's such a
super
problem.
secluded. Yeah,
Right. And that problem probably wouldn't exist nearly as much if it was more of like you're doing it for the aspirational challenge. Well, not just that, but also like the whole gearing thing that we talked about in our episode.
I wonder if guilds would have trouble like pulling Tendril. Like, I wonder if you'd have a lot of guilds that would kill Smolderon and be like, all right, see you next tier or see you next week for farm. Like, we're. I mean, because
There are definitely guilds that literally
I think-
wait for the nerfs to come.
yeah, like, but I don't know if that's bad. If
I'm not sure it's bad either.
yeah, like if you draw the line in the sand for gear, I think that's okay. And I think communities would form up to want this transmog so bad that they'll commit to it and get it. And again, I still don't think that however many people want these cosmetics, if they're really sick, they shouldn't leave original Tendril in there. It's literally too hard, right? But those people will get in a kind of if people are listening to this Patreon episode, very similar to our last podcast, we had a similar question where, like, if we were just the race world first was just lower eye level when we got to these bosses, it would be a lot more achievable for people with more. Also, I think you should be able to like, well, I don't know about going back in a later patch. They become unobtainable. Do people wait to do it with higher gear? I mean, if they left the original versions of the bosses, it would still be extremely hard to do Tendril next year, just like it was for Jaina, right? Where people went back to do Jaina mount runs. So I don't know. There's a lot of cooking to be had for that. I don't want to get too off topic from the actual question, but and then there's a sub question for you about PoE.
Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to see WoW take from PoE? This is just for me. I don't know how much you guys play PoE.
Too stupid.
I get addicted to PoE for between 1 and 10 weeks per league, which is every few months. So,
That's insane.
I haven't streamed or created any content for it, but I'm gonna probably change that at some point soon because I feel like I'm like 2,000 or 3,000 hours deep into this game, maybe more. And I feel like I'm finally cresting that hill between beginner to intermediate in this game. So now maybe we'll start streaming it at some point. I don't know, but the game is too different from WoW to really have like direct systems that I think should be lifted. The thing that I think PoE does really well is after every league. So every league they have a seasonal mechanic, right? Just like Diablo, just like most ARPGs, and what PoE I think does really well is after every league, they sit down and they think, would this be good for the core game to have this? And then the answer is either yes, no, or with changes. And if it's with changes, they'll come back a few leagues down the line and they'll be like, all right, now we're reintroducing this mechanic. We figured out how we can make it a healthy part of the evergreen game. Sometimes they're just like, yep, this mechanic was great. Everybody loves it. You got it for the rest of the time. And sometimes they're like, you know what? This was a fun experiment, but it's not going to be healthy for the game, or like, yeah, this one sucked, sorry, it's not coming to the core game. And I think WoW could really use that as well with like, there are things that get done in WoW that it feels like then we go to the next patch and we leave them behind And in Dragonflight, there hasn't been too much of that because I think there's been kind of a lot of backlash to that system. But I think a lot of that backlash came from the fact that Blizzard did a really poor job of identifying when there was something that there's like, hey, we've actually developed something good here. Like, this should just kind of be evergreen, right? Like, if you look back at old the Netherlight Crucible, right? And like artifact weapons in general, all the things that people call borrowed power systems as well, right? Like some of those were kind of good, some of them were kind of bad, and some of them it's like you could see the potential here, but they needed a recook, right? They need to be reheated. And I think WoW could definitely take from PoE, and this is the same with seasonal affixes as well, right? Like there are categories of stuff that they shouldn't have to just have all of them stay in the game forever, and they shouldn't have to throw all of them away forever. They should have like a team after every patch that looks back and is like, which of these things, based on how people played them, based on how this season went, should we try and bring into the game forever or not?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think the only real feedback you get from this is there is an opinion within WoW players that's like, this doesn't feel like an MMO anymore and it's super seasonal. And I think those people would be super against this. I think gaming has just become seasonal. It's like very normal to play a game for a few months and then play another one and then come back. But like, just imagine you have to also make good things. I would say that like Legion and BFA, like, yeah, they were borrowed power expansions. Like but you didn't feel like every season there was something new. And BFA there kind of was. It was like, initially there was Azerite armor and then that persisted and then you added essences and then you added corruption, and it did feel like every time you're lung into a new patch there was a new like almost ARPG like seasonal new thing, and they kind of hit on both essences and corruption, right? But like I think a lot of the borrowed power expansions were more like the whole expansion was this thing, and it took a long time for them to figure that out. There just wasn't enough quality of like this just works right away. It was like pretty much everything that they implemented in those years was really bad, and then it had to be made good. And because so many people play at the beginning of the seasons, I would just say the quality would need to be better. Same thing with seasonal affixes. Some seasonal affixes were awesome. It would be really good if they just took the seasonal affixes that were good and just kept experimenting. And if they got a good one, they just kept it, and you just saw encrypted sometimes every season, right? Like there's a world where they should do that. But also that's kind of PoE's crux is when you start playing a game like me, I'm way too stupid to play that game, right? Like when you start playing that game, there's so much going on, and maybe you don't have to interact with it to have a good time. And I've heard that from PoE players a lot. Like you can kind of just play the game and then you'll really like it, and then you want to get into this thing and you want to try this thing and you want to figure out how this thing works, right? But like I could see WoW being even harder to get into if right now you logged in and yeah, essences and corruption were great, but like do you want to have those every patch? Like that'd be hard to kind of build that into the base game without it becoming this thing that just has all these things from the past that people have to do. But I do think what you're saying is cool. And I also heard this recently, the same thing, the Mythic Rating post with Dobby, whatever his name, I call him Dobby. He mentioned how this game's too predictable, right? You get a new season, and Dragonflight, I think, as good as Dragonflight was, it was very bland in patch on patch. You weren't getting any sauce, right? You were just getting some class changes, and they did more of those this expansion than ever, at least early. But like you weren't expecting something crazy every patch. You're expecting a new zone, a new raid. Like in those borrowed power expansions, you were kind of getting some stuff like throughout the whole thing, and it didn't feel as formulaic, and it felt like they were a little bit more creative. And I could see not doing the whole expansion long borrowed power thing, but like I don't know, like after the first patch or after the first expansion, like season 2, season 3, season 4, I don't know if it would be a bad idea to get a little bit more creative and add some of that stuff back in. And then like you said, ARPG, like if it's great and it could fit into the game, slam it, right? But I have a feeling from what we've seen so far that they somehow in their workflow, they're not as good at when they did stuff like that. It was way too frequently not good right away. And I think people were really tiresome of the new cool thing being obviously bad and broken when it comes out, and taking a long feedback chain to get it to a point. And pretty much all of them got to a point that was really good. It just took too long. I think they would have to be a lot more confident in having that stuff ready to go at the beginning of a patch. And I think for the times where it's been like that, or if you saw that version at the end of the patch, and if that was there at the beginning, it would be a universal banger. So I don't know if any of that makes sense, but just to go off what you're saying.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this before Dragonflight came out, actually. I remember we talked about how Dragonflight or will potentially become bland without like having anything too crazy coming out. And I actually remember having this exact same cook where I was like, what if they just kept a lot of these systems that they had in the game, like essences and stuff? Like imagine having all these systems compounding each other and you would have like such a intricate character that you can build. But the problem is it adds a lot of bloat, and that's been a huge problem with PoE, right? Like that problem would
100%.
probably carry over to retail. But I mean, like like on one hand, it's a nice thing because that's what people love about PoE, and also like the same with retail because people love that it's intricate, it's an MMO. There's a lot of character building depth, which we kind of lack right now. But obviously comes at a disadvantage. I will say one thing though is Blizzard is a little bit too quick on giving up with a lot of content ideas that they've had in the past, like Torghast, for example. I've always said that even though Torghast kind of sucked at the time, it feels kind of bad that they just scrapped Torghast when they could have like reiterated over Torghast and probably have made it great had they just kept it and did something different on top of it. I really wish they had more than just whatever we have now, which is just
Yeah.
like M plus raid and open world.
I don't know. I feel like Torghast never got to like a good point. I do feel like a lot of the like essences corruption type systems you could point to and you could be like, this started out bad. It got good by the end of the patch, and then it was discarded, right? Because it was over, right? It was the end of the expansion. And it is rough that so many people's experiences with those systems were just in the parts where they were bad, right? With like the obvious acquisition problems that they kept having with all those things. Torghast is a tough one though. I don't know. I feel like Torghast was still pretty far away from being good.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would have welcomed further cooking on it. I still think it would be a great alternate leveling system as well. It's just doing Torghast runs as alternate leveling. I think could be cool. But it's not one of those things where it's like, oh, you could change one line in the code and fix this, right? It's like this is still a sizable amount of cooking away from being great.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like something like Visions in my mind would be something that I
Visions
really
free.
enjoy.
Yeah.
Yep, like just like some variation of Vision. Obviously, like Mage Tower would be a big one.
Like it's crazy how many of those things were good. They were good. Like they were good things. They all universally took too long to be good. Actually, Visions was kind of just good.
Visions was good out the gate, yeah.
Yeah,
Visions got
Visions
bad
was
at the
good.
end, but it was good out the gate, yeah.
Yeah, I
It was
guess
actually quite
I'm
opposite.
lumping in Visions with corruption, like the corruption system. But although like it is weird that, and it doesn't really speak very well to Blizzard that this is true, but they did get the exact same thing wrong in all of those. Like it was just acquisition. Like how you acquired the thing was what was fucked for Legion legendaries, for essences, for corruption, for Azerite. It wasn't tradable. Like everything.
Yeah.
The whole like what was it called when you scrapped it and you could
Residuum?
yeah, residuum, all of that. They got literally like 0 for 10. They got all of them wrong in a row with the exact same thing. It's fucking insane that happened.
That's like a pessimistic look at it. The optimistic look is acquisition of like gear and power has been really nice in Dragonflight. Like it's clear they've switched philosophies with just the power of the upgrade system as well. Like, but if you want items, you can get them now. So maybe that would mean if they were to do something like those systems again, they would not, for the 11th time in the row, screw up in that same direction of it being too hard to acquire at the start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it.
All right, that's going to be the point where we end the podcast for this week. We'll be back next week to talk about all of the stuff that happens between now and then, or whatever other topic we can come up with. Yeah.
Yo.